True intelligence isn't shown by what you know, it's revealed by what you choose not to say. Everyone thinks being smart means knowing a lot, speaking sharply, or having all the answers. But the deeper truth is this. Some of the most common phrases we say without thinking are clear signals of undeveloped thinking. Ask yourself, have you ever said something that quietly made others question your wisdom? Without even realizing it? An intelligent man doesn't need to win arguments. He wins through how he lives. Life doesn't reward the man who always has to be right. It honors the one who stays aware, humble, and clear-headed. Some phrases may seem harmless, like, "I already know that," "I'll do it later," or, "That's just how I am." But in reality, they reflect a deeper mindset that holds you back, unless you choose to break free. What you stay silent about says more about your strength than any excuse ever could. In a world where everyone rushes to speak, the truly strong man chooses to stay still. He doesn't speak to be seen. He speaks to bring clarity. And he knows when silence is power. His restraint, his timing, and his refusal to engage in mindless chatter are all signs of a mind shaped by discipline. In the journey to becoming a man of depth and clarity, learning to master your speech is not just an art, it's a discipline. Stoic philosophy doesn't demand total silence, but it teaches you to treat your words like a warrior treats his weapons, used with purpose, never wasted. What follows are 9 phrases that may seem ordinary, but each of them is a red flag, a subtle self-sabotage that intelligent men learn to eliminate. Let's break them down and reshape your mindset. Not just to speak less, but to grow wiser. 1. I already know that. There's a subtle kind of arrogance that slips through in everyday conversations. Often undetected, masked as confidence but fueled by fear. It shows up in one short, dangerous phrase. I already know that. On the surface, it sounds like knowledge, like mastery, but underneath, it's the voice of someone who has closed the door to learning. And that, more than ignorance, is the real enemy of growth. You see, truly intelligent men don't cling to the illusion of knowing everything. They understand that the moment you believe you've learned it all, you've stopped evolving. When someone says, "I already know that," what they're really saying is, "I'm done being a student." And once you stop being a student, life stops teaching you. I remember a moment early in my career, sitting with a mentor I deeply admired, a man who had weathered storms I couldn't yet imagine. He began sharing an insight about a task I thought I had mastered. Without thinking, I cut him off. "Yeah, I already know that." He didn't argue. He didn't correct me. He just nodded slowly, with a look that said more than words ever could. I brushed it off in the moment. But that night, it hit me like a brick. I had just robbed myself, not only of his wisdom, but of the chance to see the situation from a perspective carved out by decades of experience, something no book or tutorial could ever replicate. Stoic wisdom teaches us that the ego is the master of deception. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And this phrase, "I already know that," is one of its favorite lines. Marcus Aurelius warned us that you cannot learn anything when you assume you already know it. Because knowledge isn't a trophy. It's not something you win and display on a shelf. It's a river, always flowing, always reshaping itself. And if you stop to admire the last stone you picked up, the current passes you by. I once observed a master craftsman, a man decades into his trade, patiently listening to a young apprentice explain a basic technique. He nodded, asked questions, and even thanked the kid for his input. Later, I asked him why. He smiled and said, "Because sometimes the most unexpected minds show you the most overlooked truths." That moment stuck with me. Not because of what the apprentice said, but because of what the master chose not to say. That's intelligence, not loud, not flashy, but anchored in humility. When you say, "I already know that," you're not just dismissing information, you're dismissing the opportunity to grow, to listen, to see through a different lens. Even if you've heard the lesson before, you haven't lived it the same way today. You haven't heard it from this person. In this moment, through this nuance, wisdom isn't just in absorbing new information, it's in noticing familiar truths differently. It's in catching the whisper behind the words. And even when the insight isn't groundbreaking, listening with openness shows something rare: respect. Not just for the speaker, but for the process of learning itself. That alone makes you someone worth listening to. Because people gravitate to those who are willing to keep their cup half full, not those who declare it overflowing before the conversation even begins. In the Stoic way of life, this humility is not weakness, it's self-mastery. It's the strength to put curiosity above pride, to trade being right for being real. The world is filled with noise, people shouting to be heard, desperate to seem smart, but the truly wise man? He listens more than he speaks. He knows that silence is a signal, and that sometimes, the deepest learning happens when you simply stay open. So if you catch yourself about to say, "I already know that," pause. Ask yourself, am I trying to protect my image? Or am I open to being challenged, stretched, and refined? Because true intelligence isn't in knowing more, it's in being brave enough to admit you don't know it all. That's how real growth begins. That's where wisdom lives. 2. That's impossible. Few words shut the door on growth faster than this. That's impossible. It sounds rational. It sounds protective. But if you listen closely, what you're really hearing is fear dressed up as logic. Fear of failing. Fear of trying. Fear of being wrong. And perhaps most dangerous of all, fear of stepping into the unknown. Intelligent men don't speak in limits. They speak in possibilities, because they understand that most obstacles in life aren't made of concrete, they're made of perspective. Stoic philosophy has long taught us that it's not the obstacle that holds us back. It's our judgment about the obstacle. It's the meaning we assign to the struggle. When someone says, "That's impossible," they're not describing reality, they're describing their relationship with fear. I once worked with a man named Robert. Sharp mind, calm demeanor, decades of experience. At first glance, the kind of person you'd trust with any major decision. But every time a new idea surfaced, expanding into a new market, overhauling a failing process, trying something bold, his default response was always the same: "That's impossible." And it didn't sound angry or stubborn. It sounded practical, responsible, like the voice of reason. But over time, it became painfully clear Robert wasn't protecting the company from risk. He was protecting himself from discomfort. He wasn't evaluating the challenge. He was avoiding it. His fear of failure had found a mask. And that mask was labeled realism. The Stoics saw through masks like that. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And that line burns with truth. What we call impossible is often just untried, untested, unfamiliar. But when fear whispers in your ear, it doesn't come with sirens or panic. It comes with excuses that sound reasonable. It tells you not to reach, not to risk. It tells you to wait. And while you're waiting, someone else, less certain but more courageous, is already doing what you said couldn't be done. I remember a project early in my career. Everything pointed to failure. The timeline was tight. The resources were limited. The odds were laughable. And every part of me wanted to say, "This is too much. It's not going to work." But instead of speaking those words into reality, I asked myself one simple question: what can I control right now? I stopped looking at the mountain and focused on the step in front of me. That project went on to become one of the most impactful successes I've ever been part of. Not because it was easy, but because we didn't let the idea of impossible make decisions for us. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The mind is your battlefield. It's where defeat happens long before the world even gets a chance to challenge you. And the moment you say, "That's impossible," you've already surrendered. You've given fear the final word before you've even begun. Intelligent men don't deny the difficulty of challenges, they accept them. And then move forward anyway. They know that growth never shows up looking like comfort. They understand that nearly everything worth doing looks impossible at first, until it's done. And when the voice of fear starts to echo, they don't try to silence it, they acknowledge it, and then choose courage instead. The truth is, many people will never know how far they could have gone, simply because they stopped before they started. They allowed one phrase, "That's impossible," to become the closing line in a chapter that was never written. But those who rise, those who choose a different path, they rewrite what's possible through action, through grit, through belief that effort, no matter how small, always builds something. If you're tempted to say, "That's impossible," pause. Ask yourself, is it really impossible? Or is it just uncomfortable, unfamiliar, uncertain? Because fear is loudest just before the breakthrough. And the man who learns to move anyway, not recklessly, but deliberately, with purpose, that man isn't just intelligent. He's unstoppable. Stoicism doesn't promise ease. It promises clarity. And with clarity, you don't shrink from what's hard, you rise to meet it. That's how boundaries are broken. That's how the impossible becomes the inevitable. 3. That's not my fault. Few phrases feel more instinctive, and yet more damaging, than this one. That's not my fault. It rolls off the tongue quickly, especially when something collapses around you, at work, in relationships, or in life. And at first glance, it seems harmless, honest, even. But here's the truth. Every time you rush to distance yourself from responsibility, you're not just avoiding blame, you're giving away your power. Because intelligent men understand something most people miss. Taking responsibility isn't about accepting guilt. It's about reclaiming control. When you say, "That's not my fault," what you're really saying is, "I'm not part of the solution." And that mindset builds walls around progress. I once knew a man who lost a critical client. His first instinct was to explain why it wasn't on him. The team under-delivered. The market shifted. The client was difficult. All of those were valid points. But while he was busy justifying, the lesson slipped away, and with it, the chance to evolve. You see, when you shift blame, You also shift the responsibility to fix, to learn, to grow. You become a spectator to your own life. Stoic philosophy cuts straight through that illusion. Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters. That response, that moment of honest reflection, is where true strength is forged. Intelligent men know that owning even a small part of a problem doesn't make you weak. It makes you self-aware. It means you value solutions more than ego. I've been in situations where things fell apart. And truthfully, I wasn't entirely at fault. But when I chose to look inward first, to ask what I could have done better, something powerful happened. I stopped waiting for others to fix it. I became the one who could initiate change. Blame feels comfortable. It relieves pressure. It offers the illusion of safety. But responsibility? That's where growth lives. And the irony is, the more responsibility you accept, the more freedom you gain. Because now, you're not at the mercy of circumstance or other people's mistakes. You are steering your own path. Even if someone else dropped the ball, you can choose how you pick it up. You can lead through clarity, not through pointing fingers. One of the core principles of Stoicism is the dichotomy of control, the ability to separate what is within your influence from what is not. You can't control how others behave, but you can control how you respond. You can't always prevent problems, but you can choose whether you engage with them as a victim or as a leader. And when things go wrong, intelligent men don't waste time assigning blame like a judge in court. They ask better questions. What can I learn from this? What do I do next? How do I improve? Years ago, I made a costly mistake on a project, not because of my own misstep, but because I didn't speak up when I saw the cracks forming. I convinced myself it wasn't my responsibility. But when everything collapsed, that excuse gave me no comfort. I realized then that silence is also a choice, and responsibility can begin the moment you decide to care. Since then, I've made it a rule: if I'm involved, I'm responsible, even in a small way. That mindset hasn't just changed how people see me, it's changed how I see myself. Responsibility builds character. It breeds trust. It makes you the kind of person others want to follow. Not because you're perfect, but because you're accountable. Because you're honest enough to say, here's my part in this, and here's how I'm going to make it better. That's not weakness. That's strength most people avoid. It's easier to say, that's not my fault, but easier doesn't make you wiser. It just keeps you stuck. If you've been in a situation where your instinct was to deflect, take a second look, not to shame yourself, but to empower yourself. Because every moment you take ownership is a moment you take command. You become the author of the story, not just a character in someone else's plot. And the man who lives that way, with clarity, courage, and conviction, that man doesn't run from mistakes. He transforms them. Stoicism isn't about blaming the world. It's about mastering your response to it. And responsibility, far from being a burden, is the very path to becoming unshakable. 4. I don't need any help. There's a certain pride we attach to standing on our own. Society celebrates the lone wolf, the self-made man, the figure who carries his burdens in silence and asks nothing of anyone. And somewhere along the way, we started to believe that needing help was weakness, that asking for support was an admission of failure. But here's what most people never realize: saying, I don't need any help, isn't strength. It's isolation wearing a brave face. True intelligence doesn't come from pretending you can do it all. It comes from knowing when you can't, and having the courage to admit it. The words may sound noble, like a badge of independence, but in reality, they often come from a place of fear. Fear of being seen as weak, fear of being judged, fear of letting someone in. Yet intelligent men know the truth. Every great achievement, every major success, every personal transformation, somewhere along the way, it involved help, advice, encouragement, a hand extended when the weight became too heavy. And rejecting that help doesn't prove you're capable. It proves you're afraid to be seen in the process of becoming. I once read about Abraham Lincoln, the man often painted as the Stoic giant, carrying a fractured nation through its darkest hours. And yes, he was resilient, but what most people miss is how often he leaned on others. He surrounded himself with people who challenged him. He sought counsel even from rivals, not because he doubted himself, but because he knew the weight of leadership couldn't be carried alone. That's not insecurity. That's wisdom in motion. Stoic philosophy never told us to do everything ourselves. In fact, it teaches that we're part of a greater whole, that we are here not just to endure, but to serve, support, and connect. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, openly credited his mentors, teachers, and peers for shaping his thinking. If the most powerful emperor of his time could say, "I couldn't have done this alone," why are so many of us afraid to echo those words? I've been there, carrying more than I should, believing that asking for help meant I was losing control. I stayed quiet when I should have reached out. I chose silence over support. And what I gained in pride, I lost in clarity, energy, and peace of mind. It wasn't until I opened up, just once, that everything shifted. I didn't find judgment. I found relief. I found understanding. And I found that people were far more willing to help than I had ever allowed myself to believe. There's a dangerous illusion that says if we carry everything alone, we'll be stronger. But strength isn't measured by how long you can hold on. It's measured by how honest you can be when your hands start to shake. A man who says, "I'm fine," when he's breaking is not a warrior. He's a prisoner of his own ego. And that pride, left unchecked, doesn't just exhaust you, it isolates you. It builds walls that keep out both the pain and the healing. There is power in reaching out. There is courage in admitting, "I could use some support." Because when you do, you give others the chance to show up for you. You give yourself the chance to breathe. And most importantly, you give your journey space to grow without burning you out in the process. Even the strongest structures need pillars. Even the tallest trees need roots. And even the wisest minds need voices around them that challenge, uplift, and guide. Intelligent men choose connection over isolation, not because they're dependent, but because they're clear enough to see the truth. We're not meant to do life alone. We're designed to evolve together, to carry each other through storms, and to build strength not just through solitude, but through solidarity. Pride whispers, "You don't need anyone." Wisdom says, "We rise higher when we rise together." So if you've been carrying too much, if the voice in your head keeps telling you to stay silent, remember this: reaching out isn't surrender. It's strategy. It's strength. It's the decision to grow, not just survive. That is what Stoicism teaches us. That we are never diminished by asking for help. We're only diminished when we pretend we never needed it. And the man who understands that is already stronger than most. 5. I'm too old for that. There's a quiet lie that settles into a man's mind as the years go by. It doesn't scream or threaten, it whispers. And it says, that dream? That goal? That risk you wanted to take? Forget it. You're too old for that. It shows up in jokes, in small talk, in passing phrases. But underneath, it's not humor. It's resignation. It's a belief that the best parts of life are behind us. That the pages left to write are somehow less worthy than the ones already turned. But intelligent men, wise men, see through that illusion. They know that as long as you're breathing, you're becoming. As long as your heart is beating, your journey isn't over. There's a story that still moves me, the story of Harry Bernstein. At 93 years old, long after retirement, long after most people had accepted the idea of being too late, Harry sat down and wrote his first book. It wasn't a casual attempt. It was a deeply personal memoir called The Invisible Wall, sharing the pain and hope of his childhood in a poor English town torn by division. He submitted the manuscript to publishers. It was rejected, again and again, but he kept writing, and at 96, it was finally published. The book became a global success, translated into multiple languages, and he didn't stop there. He wrote 3 more books afterward. Not because he had to, but because he still had something to give, something to say, something to become. What's powerful about Harry's story isn't just the achievement, it's the mindset. He didn't ask, "Am I too old?" He asked, "What can I still create with the time I have?" That's the shift. That's the perspective that intelligent men adopt. They understand that purpose doesn't expire. That passion doesn't vanish with age. If anything, it deepens. The older you are, the more you've lived, the more you've felt, and the more you have to offer. Not just in skill, but in insight, in clarity, in compassion. The fire might burn quieter, but it burns steadier, and the heat of that wisdom can still light up the world. Marcus Aurelius, one of the great voices of Stoic philosophy, reminded himself daily that death could come at any moment, but not to fear it, to use it as a reminder that life is meant to be lived fully until the final breath. He didn't believe in waiting. He believed in acting with urgency, not because time was running out, but because it was still available. And that's the key. Every day you wake up is a vote from life that your work here isn't done. And it's not age that stops us, it's the story we tell ourselves about age. The real limitation isn't the number, it's the narrative. I've seen men in their 60s, 70s, even 80s start businesses, learn instruments, mentor others, fall in love again, heal old wounds, and write new chapters they once believed were closed forever. They didn't let a date on a birth certificate define their destiny. They let their desire to grow, to serve, to explore, lead the way. And I've also seen the opposite, men much younger, already tired, already finished, walking through life as if their best days are behind them. The difference wasn't age, it was belief. When you say, "I'm too old for that," what you're really saying is, "I've stopped giving myself permission to live boldly." But the Stoic mindset urges you to reconsider, to ask not what's possible based on your age, but what's possible based on your courage. Because it's not about how many years you've lived, it's about how much life you're still willing to pour into those years. Time doesn't wait, but it does reward those who keep moving, keep learning, keep risking, even if the world thinks it's too late. If you're hearing this now, And there's a quiet voice in you saying, I wish I could. Don't ignore it. That voice is your truth trying to break through the lies you've picked up along the way. Listen to it. Give it space. You don't need a guarantee. You just need a decision that today is still worth showing up for. That the next chapter might just be your most meaningful one yet. And the man who believes that, he is never too old. He's just getting started. 6. I'll do it later. There's a place where dreams go to die, and it's not in failure, or rejection, or defeat. It's in delay. It's in those quiet, confident promises we make to ourselves with the softest of voices. I'll do it later. That phrase sounds innocent. It sounds organized. It even feels like commitment. But it's the most seductive lie we tell ourselves. Because it offers comfort without action. It delays effort under the illusion of planning. And by the time we realize what we've done, the opportunity is gone. Intelligent men understand that later is the graveyard of potential. That the only time that truly belongs to us is now. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. There's a story I can't forget about a man named Thomas. A respected businessman. Someone who had built a name for himself through discipline and drive. But beneath the success, there was a quiet regret. He always told himself he'd take more time to be with his father. They had planned a fishing trip for years. He always postponed it. Work came first. Things were hectic. He figured there would be time. But time ran out. His father passed away suddenly. And all that was left were a few half-written messages, unsent drafts, and a list of things he meant to say. He once told me, I wasn't trying to neglect him. I just thought there would always be another chance. That sentence stayed with me like a scar on the soul. The Stoics didn't believe in waiting for the perfect moment. They believed in the urgency of life. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Not because life is short, but because life is unpredictable. And if you treat time like it owes you something, you're already living in debt. We procrastinate not because we don't care, but because we assume we'll always have more time, that we can apologize next week, pursue that dream later, start healing after things calm down. But that illusion robs us of the only moment we can truly control, this one. I've done it myself. Postponed conversations, delayed decisions. Told myself I'd take the leap once I felt ready. But readiness is a myth. The stars will never align perfectly. The timing will always be a little inconvenient. And the truth is, if you wait for life to slow down, you'll be waiting forever. Intelligent men realize that action doesn't always come with confidence. Sometimes it comes with trembling hands and an unsure heart. But they act anyway, because they've learned that clarity comes through movement, not waiting. Every time we say, I'll do it later, we're gambling with something we don't own. We're pushing purpose into a space that doesn't exist yet. And too often, later becomes never. The letter isn't written. The apology isn't made. The project isn't started. And one day, you're standing in a life built from delays, wondering where all the passion went. But it didn't disappear. It just got buried under a pile of postponements. The Stoic mindset demands that we live with intention, that we don't waste today bargaining for a better tomorrow. Because the man who acts now, who picks up the phone, starts the journal, speaks the truth, takes the step, even when it's awkward, even when it's imperfect, that man doesn't just move forward. He builds momentum. He builds a life free from regret. A life with scars. Yes, but not with what ifs. If you're hearing this and something inside you is stirring, a task you've avoided, a decision you've put off, a conversation you've pushed to the side, take this as your call to act. Not in panic, but with purpose, because urgency isn't recklessness. It's reverence for the time you still have. And the man who learns to act before fear tells him to freeze is the man who lives not just longer, but deeper. You don't need to do it all today, but you do need to begin. Because every meaningful change in your life starts with a moment when you stopped waiting and chose to act. That moment could be now. 7. That's just how I am. There's a phrase that sounds like honesty, but it's really a prison. It sounds like self-awareness, but it's actually a wall. That phrase is, that's just how I am. And it's one of the most dangerous things a man can say. Because in those 6 words lies the quiet decision to stop growing. To freeze your identity in place and protect it with excuses. To hold on to habits not because they serve you, but because they're familiar. Intelligent men recognize this trap, and they choose to break it. They understand that who we are is not set in stone. We are not finished products. We are drafts in progress, and we decide what edits we're willing to make. When a man says, "That's just how I am," what he's really doing is shielding himself from change. Maybe he lashes out in anger and refuses to learn emotional control. Maybe he avoids vulnerability and uses that phrase to justify staying distant. Maybe he resists new perspectives, new habits, new ways of thinking, all under the banner of self-acceptance. But there's a big difference between accepting yourself and abandoning your potential. And the Stoics knew that well. Epictetus taught that it's not events or people that disturb us, but our interpretations, our beliefs about who we are and what we're capable of. And beliefs can be rewritten. That's the power we often forget we have. I've met men who used, "That's just how I am," to excuse selfishness, laziness, even cruelty. They wore it like armor, not to protect their true self, but to protect their refusal to evolve. And I've also met men who were once stuck in those same patterns, but who chose to change their narrative. Men who said, "This may be who I've been, but it doesn't have to be who I stay." That shift doesn't require perfection. It requires willingness, the courage to take an honest look at your flaws and say, "I'm ready to do better." Growth doesn't mean you hate who you are. It means you respect yourself enough to become more. The man who keeps repeating, "That's just how I am," is choosing to stay small. He's choosing comfort over character. But the man who asks, "Is this serving the person I want to become?" that man is on the Stoic path. Because Stoicism is not about suppressing who you are, it's about refining it, sharpening it, stripping away the illusions and defenses that hold you back from your highest self. Life is constant change. Water doesn't stay still. Trees grow or die. Stars burn out or are reborn. Nature itself is in motion, and we are part of it. To resist change is to resist life. To say, "That's just how I am," is to deny the very essence of being alive. You are not your past. You are not your reactions. You are not your worst day. You are the sum of what you choose to do next. And that choice is yours every single moment. There was a time in my life when I told myself I was just someone who couldn't connect deeply with others. That I was too focused, too independent, too logical. I told myself that's just how I was wired. But beneath that statement was fear, fear of intimacy, fear of disappointment, fear of being seen, and once I named it for what it was, I couldn't hide behind the excuse anymore. I had to step into the discomfort of growth. And it changed everything, not overnight, not perfectly, but it moved me forward. The man who evolves is not the one who's always confident. He's the one who's always curious. Curious about who he could become if he let go of the labels and stories that no longer fit. He listens to feedback, he reflects, he makes adjustments, not because someone else demands it, but because he knows his life is his responsibility, and every excuse is just a barrier between where he is and where he could be. That's just how I am, might feel like a shield, but it's really a cage. It protects you from the challenge of becoming more, but it also keeps you from the reward. And that reward is growth, peace, power, the kind of power that doesn't shout, but lives quietly in the man who refuses to stop evolving. Stoicism teaches that mastery of the self is the highest goal. Not dominance over others, not control of every situation, but mastery over your own patterns, impulses, and narratives. If you've been holding on to that phrase, if it's been your defense for too long, maybe now is the time to set it down. Not because who you are is broken, but because who you are is still becoming. And that journey? It never ends. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. 8. I have to prove I'm right. There's a trap that many men fall into. A trap disguised as intelligence. Masked by sharp words and quick comebacks. It's the compulsion to always be right. The desire to dominate every conversation. To win every argument. To have the final word. On the surface, it looks like strength, but underneath, it reveals something much weaker, the fragile ego. The man obsessed with being right isn't chasing truth. He's chasing validation. He's fighting not for clarity, but for control. And that's not wisdom. That's fear in a well-tailored suit. Intelligent men understand that the goal isn't to win the debate. The goal is to understand more deeply, to think more clearly, and to grow more humbly. When you make it your mission to prove you're right, you're no longer listening, you're waiting for your turn to speak. You don't hear other perspectives. You analyze them only to dismantle them, and in doing that, you miss the opportunity to be expanded by someone else's truth. That's the danger. It's not that you might be wrong. It's that your need to be right blocks you from becoming wiser. I've watched conversations collapse under the weight of pride, two people speaking, but no one really connecting. Just verbal sparring, just ego in motion. Stoic philosophy teaches us a better way. Marcus Aurelius, arguably one of the most powerful men in history, wrote openly in his journal not about how often he was right, but about how often he needed correction. He invited disagreement. He welcomed challenge, because he knew that truth doesn't need to be proven loudly. It reveals itself quietly. Through observation, consistency, and reflection. A wise man doesn't insist on being right. He insists on understanding, and when he's wrong, he adjusts, not because he lost, but because he leveled up. I've been guilty of chasing the win. I've raised my voice to sound more certain. I've cornered people with facts, not because I wanted to help them see, but because I wanted to feel superior. And every time I walked away from those conversations, I felt a temporary rush, but never peace. Because deep down, I knew I wasn't growing. I was just defending. And defense isn't strength, it's stagnation. It's the mind's way of avoiding vulnerability. Of avoiding the possibility that someone else might know something you don't. Real strength is silent. It listens more than it speaks. It doesn't interrupt to assert itself, it absorbs to understand better. The man who always needs to prove he's right is often the one who feels the most insecure about being wrong. But the man who knows himself deeply doesn't flinch when challenged. He doesn't need to shout. His calm presence is louder than any argument. His actions, his consistency, his integrity, those speak far louder than any debate ever could. There's a deeper truth here. Truth doesn't care whether you win the argument. It doesn't need your defense. It doesn't require volume or victory laps. It exists whether you convince others or not. And once you understand that, the need to be right becomes laughable. Because it's not about the argument. It's about the alignment. It's about living in such a way that your life proves your point. Not your words. I've seen this kind of quiet confidence in the most powerful men I know. They're rarely the loudest in the room. They don't interrupt. They don't debate endlessly. But when they speak, it lands. Because it's not laced with ego, it's filled with presence, with perspective, with patience. And when someone disagrees with them, they lean in, not to attack, but to learn. And that humility? That's real power. If you find yourself needing to win every conversation, ask yourself why. Is it because you're afraid of being seen as weak? Or is it because you haven't yet made peace with the fact that being wrong is part of growing? Either way, there's freedom in letting go of the need to be right. There's freedom in choosing truth over triumph. Because the man who doesn't need to prove himself is the one who already knows who he is. And that man, he doesn't speak to be heard. He speaks to connect. He speaks when it adds value. And when it doesn't, he stays silent, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. That's stoicism in action. That's intelligence that doesn't need applause. It just lives, breathes, and speaks for itself. 9. I don't care. There's a phrase that sounds powerful at first, like armor, like control, like the ultimate shield against emotional chaos. I don't care. It's said with a shrug, a smirk, or a hardened silence. It signals detachment, coolness, the image of someone unbothered by the mess of the world. But look a little closer, and you'll see it's not strength at all. It's protection. It's a mask. Because more often than not, when a man says, I don't care, what he really means is, I'm tired of being disappointed. I'm afraid to be vulnerable. I'm exhausted from giving too much and getting too little. The words are cold, but the pain behind them runs deep. And intelligent men, truly self-aware men, don't hide behind that phrase. They confront what they feel. They examine it, and they choose their responses with intention, not avoidance. I don't care might sound like freedom, but it's often just numbness. A man who says he doesn't care about his relationships, his purpose, his future, that's not liberation. That's disconnection. It's a quiet surrender to apathy. A way of checking out emotionally without having to explain why. But Stoic philosophy never taught us to be numb. It never told us to silence our humanity. It taught us to discipline our responses, not deny our feelings. Marcus Aurelius wrote about heartbreak, about loss, about frustration. But he didn't run from those emotions. He walked through them with calm awareness. He asked, what is in my control? And chose to focus on that. Not to escape life, but to face it without being owned by it. When you say, I don't care, often enough, you start to believe it. And over time, it becomes harder to reconnect with the things that once moved you. You dull your sensitivity. You stop expressing love, stop investing in people, stop showing up for yourself. And eventually, you forget what passion felt like. You forget what it means to care deeply, not because you've grown stronger, but because you've shut down the very part of you that made life rich. Intelligent men know that caring is not a weakness. It's a responsibility. To care about your character, your integrity, the way you treat people, the way you show up in hard moments. That's not soft, that's strength with a spine. There's a quiet courage in saying, "This matters to me." There's honor in admitting, "That hurt." There's wisdom in choosing to feel something, even when it's uncomfortable, because it means you're still connected to what's real. "I don't care" is easy. It's convenient. It gets you out of conversations, out of conflict, out of commitment. But what it also gets you out of is connection. With yourself, with others, with life itself. Caring requires presence. It requires you to be awake. And sometimes, it even requires pain. But that pain is purposeful. It shows you what matters. I've caught myself saying, "I don't care," during moments when I felt powerless. When someone let me down. When I was too tired to fight for something meaningful. But deep down, I did care. I just didn't know how to express it without feeling exposed. And that's the key. "I don't care" is often just emotional armor. But you can't build a meaningful life behind armor. At some point, you have to take it off. Breathe through the discomfort, and learn to engage again, this time, with clarity and boundaries. Stoicism teaches us not to be indifferent, but to be deliberate, to care where it counts, to care in the right measure, at the right time, and for the right reasons. Not because the world needs your emotional chaos, but because your soul needs your honesty. You can't lead with apathy. You can't build something meaningful by staying detached from everything. You have to choose your values, define what matters, and stand for it, even if it costs you ease. When a man says, "I don't care," he thinks he's protecting his peace. But peace doesn't come from ignoring life. It comes from facing it, understanding it, and mastering your role within it. The man who can care, truly care, without being ruled by his emotions. That's the man who's in control. That's the man who lives with depth. And that is the kind of strength Stoicism calls us to build, not numbness, but awareness, not apathy, but grounded purpose. A man who lives with conviction, who chooses what to care about and commits to it fully, will always outlast the one hiding behind indifference. Because life rewards those who show up, not those who check out. Final message. You've just heard 9 phrases that intelligent men never say, not because they're perfect, but because they've outgrown the mindset that limits growth. These aren't just words to avoid, they're patterns to break. Behind each phrase lies a deeper truth. Real strength isn't in proving, avoiding, or pretending. It's in listening, adjusting, and rising with humility. A truly wise man doesn't say, "I already know that," because he values learning more than ego. He doesn't say, "That's impossible," because he understands fear hides behind that word. He doesn't say, "That's not my fault," because he knows ownership creates power. He doesn't say, "I don't need help," because he recognizes that courage often looks like reaching out. He refuses to be limited by age, because time isn't what defines him, choice does. He doesn't delay action with, "I'll do it later," because he knows tomorrow is never guaranteed. He doesn't trap himself with, "That's just how I am," because he believes in the power of transformation. He doesn't argue just to prove he's right. His life proves it for him. And he never hides behind, "I don't care." Because he knows caring, the right way, for the right things, is what makes a life meaningful. If even one of these hit home for you, that means you're already on the path. Keep walking, keep growing, and if you found value in this message, don't keep it to yourself, hit like, share it with someone you respect, and subscribe for more Stoic wisdom to sharpen your mind, strengthen your character, and elevate your life. You're not here to blend in, you're here to evolve. Let's grow together.